Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story, Chapter 1. Promises Written in Dust. The smell of burning leather and cheap whiskey choked the air of the dive bar, but Mason Ridge barely noticed. He stood there, 23 years old, fist clenched so tight the veins in his arms looked ready to burst. Across the room, under a flickering neon light, Daria laughed, but not with him. She leaned into Royce Mayfield, her hand lazily stroking the sleeve of his tailored jacket. Mason watched her lips whisper into Royce's ear. Both of them burst into laughter loud enough for everyone to turn and stare. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. "She would never believe in you," the voice inside him said. She never did. 6 months ago, they made promises. "Under the rusty bridge on 5th Street, she said, "I will stay with you through anything, Mason. Even when we are broke. Even when it is ugly." Now, she could not even pretend. He pushed through the crowd. Glasses clinked. Boots scuffed the dirty floor. Daria spotted him and smiled, not kindly, but with the cruel amusement of someone watching a puppy trying to chase a freight train. "Come to beg, Mason?" Daria's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Royce threw an arm around her and smirked. "Face it, Rich. You are nobody. You will always be nobody." Mason opened his mouth, but no words came. The laughter crushed him. The betrayal strangled him. Outside, rain hammered the pavement like war drums. Mason stumbled into the alley, vomiting bile and rage into the gutter. The city lights blurred in his vision. Somewhere inside the storm, a vow was made, not spoken aloud, not written in dust, but carved into the marrow of his bones. "You will see me again. And when you do, you will remember tonight." But how do you rebuild a soul after it has been ripped apart? Some nights he fell asleep at his desk with codes smeared across his face like war paint. One night, after another rejection, Mason dragged himself to Dempsey's pub. Cheap beer, dirty floors, broken dreams on tap. At the bar, he saw them, Daria and Royce, celebrating. Royce flashing keys to a new Corvette. Daria flashing the ring he had given her. Once Mason's promise ring, now traded for a diamond the size of a wolf's tooth. To real men. Daria toasted. Mason turned away, while climbing up his throat. He ordered a whiskey he could not afford. The bartender gave him the drink with a shrug and a look that said, "Poor bastard." He drank. One drink to numb the pain. 2 lies to tear open the scars. First lie, Daria said she loved him. Second lie, she said she believed in him. The whiskey burned going down, but it hurt less than looking at her. He gripped the edge of the bar so hard his knuckles cracked. Across the room, Royce whispered something to Daria. She laughed. Not the way she used to, free, wild. No, this laugh was different. Mean. Plastic. Mason's phone buzzed. Another investor rejection. He closed his eyes. The world hated dreamers who had nothing to show for it. But he would not stay nothing. He would bleed for it. He would starve for it. He would win, even if he had to crawl through hell to get there. The warehouse stank of sweat, perfume, and bad decisions. Mason's invitation had been a mistake. Daria made sure of that. Royce's birthday party was packed with half the city's wannabes, gold diggers, and greasy social climbers. Champagne flowed like rivers. Mason stood in a cheap blazer that smelled faintly of mothballs, feeling like a ghost at a feast. Across the room, Daria laughed into Royce's chest. He should have left. He should have turned around and walked into the night. Instead, he stood frozen when Royce spotted him. "Hey, Rich. Come over here." Royce's voice boomed through the party. People turned. Mason's legs moved on their own, carrying him toward the execution block. Royce grinned wide. Daria smirked. Royce grabbed a microphone from the DJ booth. "Everyone. This guy, Mason Ridge, used to think he was going to be the next Zuckerberg. Told Daria he would buy her a mansion." Royce's voice slithered into the crowd's ears. Laughter. Cameras flashing. Humiliation pouring down like acid rain. Royce clapped Mason on the shoulder hard enough to nearly knock him over. "Tell you what, Rich, when you finally get that mansion, maybe you can hire me to mow your lawn." More laughter. Mason stared at Daria. She did not look away. She did not flinch. She smiled, like a guillotine dropping slow. Mason turned and walked out into the cold night. The city skyline mocked him with its glittering towers. Above him, planes screamed into the sky, leaving behind trails of fire he could never catch. Tonight, his dreams did not just die. They were murdered, and Mason Ridge would never forgive it. Not in this life. Not in the next. The night stretched on like a punishment. Mason lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. But Mason did not notice the cold. He was too busy fighting against it. His old laptop, held together with duct tape and desperate prayers, blinked weakly in the dim light. Lines of code filled the screen, line after line after line. He barely slept. He barely ate. He built his dreams bite by bite, brick by invisible brick, while the world outside kept moving without him. Sometimes, he caught his reflection in the window, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, hair like a bird's nest. A stranger stared back, but he could not afford to care. He spent his nights coding, pitching to investors by day, eating cheap ramen if he was lucky. More often than not, he went to bed hungry. The rejections piled up like snowdrifts. Your project is too risky. No market for this right now. We suggest you get more experience first. He kept every rejection letter in a box under his bed, like fuel for a fire he refused to let die. Some nights, he heard the rumble of a Corvette speeding by his window. His fists would clench automatically. The sound of success that should have been his. The sound of what was stolen. But Mason understood something now. Nobody was coming to save him. He would have to build the ladder out of broken promises and climb out himself. One sleepless night, as he sat at his desk surrounded by pizza boxes and broken dreams, his screen dinged with an incoming email. An angel investor. Interested. Willing to meet. Mason stared at the message, heart hammering in his chest. It was not much, but it was a crack in the wall. And sometimes, all you need is a crack to bring the whole damn thing down. The meeting with the investor had gone better than Mason dared to hope. Stanley Pike, a middle-aged, sharp-eyed man with a reputation for betting on long shots, saw something in Mason's pitch. He agreed to fund the project with a small amount, just enough to keep it alive. Hope tasted strange after months of swallowing failure. Mason went home feeling almost human for the first time in forever. He decided, for reasons he could not explain, to visit the old social media accounts he had ignored since his world collapsed. Maybe curiosity, maybe masochism. Scrolling through Daria's posts was like slicing open old scars. Smiling selfies at beaches he had never seen. Diamond rings flashing in the sun. New cars. New lovers. Then he found it. A message thread. Half hidden. One of Daria's posts, a photo of her and Royce at some gaudy gala, had a comment from an old mutual friend. Damn, Daria, you left Mason at his lowest for a guy with flash? Cold girl. And Daria had replied, Mason was never going to be anything. He was a cute hobby, not a future. Royce is a real man. He has cash, connections, class. Mason was just practice. Mason read the words once. Then again. Each time, they cut deeper. Not just betrayal of the heart. Betrayal of who he was. He slammed the laptop closed so hard the table shook. Breathing hard. Heart racing. It was not enough to survive anymore. Not enough to build a new life quietly. He needed them to see it. He needed them to feel it. Every broken piece they left inside him was going to be rebuilt into something they could never touch. Something they would have to watch. And when they looked up at it, choking on their regrets, they would know he did it without them. Because of them. Because they made him. The winter wind howled against the glass storefront of the diner where Mason sat nursing a cup of black coffee. He tapped his fingers against the table, feeling the energy of a new mission crackling under his skin. Stanley had wired the first chunk of money into Mason's account. Not much. Enough to breathe. Enough to fight. He used part of it to upgrade his gear. A new laptop, faster servers. No more excuses. The rest he poured into the project. Advertising, networking, tightening the code until it sang. But the weight of betrayal never left him. It clung to his bones like frostbite. One night, after another 14-hour coding marathon, Mason stumbled into his kitchen, half delirious from hunger and exhaustion. He opened the fridge to find only half a jug of milk and a slice of questionable cheese. He laughed, bitter and hollow. This was the future Daria said would never exist. This was the man she thought would never be worth anything. Mason grabbed the milk, took a swig, and set it down hard enough that it cracked the counter tile. Then came the call. A friend of a friend. An invite to a major logistics conference. If he could network there, if he could sell the vision, it could change everything. The ticket cost nearly everything he had left. He bought it without hesitation. The night before the conference, Mason sat on the floor of his apartment, sharpening his presentation until his eyes bled words and numbers. Around him, the shadows lengthened. The city outside raged with sirens and broken promises. He whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow, they start to learn." He would walk into that conference like a ghost dressed in blood and ambition. He would not ask for permission. He would take what was his, one shattered trust at a time. The logistics conference was held in a towering hotel ballroom, flooded with artificial light and endless suits. Mason stepped in with a second-hand blazer, pressed the night before with a broken iron and a prayer. He looked like a footnote in a room full of headlines. But his eyes told a different story. They were not desperate. They were dangerous. Booths lined the space, each more polished than the last, VR demos, AI robots pouring coffee, men and women in tailored suits with perfectly rehearsed pitches. Mason found an empty corner and set up a simple stand with a demo on a modest screen. A few walked by, glanced, moved on. He waited. Then a man stopped. Gray suit. Curious eyes. Leaned in. "What is this?" Mason stood straighter. Predictive logistics AI. It learns from live inventory cycles, reduces waste, maximizes delivery windows without human recalibration. The man raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something Amazon would kill for." "I'm not selling to Amazon. I am building the next one." There was silence. Then the man smiled. "Bold. I like that." He handed Mason a card. "Call me Monday. Let us talk properly." As the man walked away, Mason turned back to the screen, calm on the outside, electricity underneath. This was the first time someone truly listened. The next morning, Mason got a call. A small distribution company wanted to test his software in real time. It was not a big contract. Not yet. But it was real. He sat on his floor, still in the same clothes from the day before, staring at the screen as the first transactions rolled in. Daria had said love was loyalty. But she used it like currency. She spent him and bought nothing. Now Mason was learning. When love is used as a weapon, the only answer is to build armor. Mason stood outside his apartment, a crumpled eviction notice in one hand, a cold slice of pepperoni pizza in the other. The landlord had waited until payday to deliver it, just enough cruelty to sting. Rent was overdue. The deposit was gone. All the money had gone into his software. He had nowhere to go. He walked the city for hours that night, boots chewing pavement, mind spinning. Every alley, every guttered storefront reminded him of where he came from, and how close he was to being erased again. Then, like a whisper, his phone buzzed. A new client. Referral from the first company. Requesting a full deployment trial. Mason stared at the screen until the cold numbed his fingers. It was working. Word was spreading. He checked his bank account. Still short of rent. But something inside shifted. He sat on the curb, staring out at the skyline. The city was not laughing anymore. It was listening. Behind him, glass shattered, a drunk couple arguing across the street. The man shouted. The woman cried. The sound dug into Mason's ribs. He had lived that fight. Heard those words. Worthless. Useless. A burden. Daria's voice echoed from years ago. But now, he did not believe her anymore. He stood, brushed the dirt from his jeans, and walked back to his place. He would not beg. He would not apologize for chasing more. The world could push him out of apartments, out of jobs, out of comfort. But it would never again push him out of himself. He opened his laptop, eyes burning, and wrote a line of code that would later power a billion-dollar engine. At that moment, he had nothing. But his soul? It had just been reclaimed. Weeks passed. Mason moved into a friend's unused basement, no windows, one outlet, and a leaking pipe that whispered all night. It was cold, but quiet. Solitary. Focused. He taped blackout sheets to the walls, set up his laptop on a milk crate, and made that space his war room. Day and night blurred into each other. Sleep came in tower shifts. Meals were rationed. There were no weekends. Only launches, updates, and performance reports. But the software worked. Company after company signed on, small ones at first, then regional distributors. Mason's system cut their delivery failures in half. His inbox filled. His name started to circulate in digital corners where real money lived. But nobody saw him. Not yet. That was how he liked it. At night, he opened a burner account and followed Daria's socials in silence. She posted carefully curated pictures, nights out, champagne flutes, hollow smiles. Royce always nearby, always performing for the lens. But Mason saw the cracks. A canceled trip here. A club appearance skipped. Sponsors pulling back. Their spotlight was flickering. He watched, not with bitterness, but calculation. He was not just building a company. He was setting the stage. Because revenge is not something you screen. It is something you prepare. Quietly. In the dark. Until one day, the lights flip on. And you're already standing center stage. 3 granola bars. That was all Mason had left in the cupboard. No groceries, no heat, no backup plan. Just hunger and an inbox filled with growing interest. His name was gaining traction across underground entrepreneur forums. A few small business blogs had mentioned the Ridge model, a term someone coined to describe the predictive algorithm he had built. But outside that digital world, Mason was still nobody. A ghost eating crumbs and burning through 16-hour shifts from a basement nobody knew existed. Still, he kept moving. He had 1 clean shirt, 3 resumes tailored for backup jobs, and a calendar filled with red marks, indicators for demo days, data updates, and client renewal targets. He could feel something coming, something bigger than survival. That week, he received a message from a mid-tier retail distributor based in Texas. They were losing hundreds of thousands every quarter due to supply chain inefficiencies and wanted a solution fast. Mason ran a remote audit overnight, customized a solution by morning, and deployed it in 48 hours. The results? A 22% performance jump in less than a week. They wired payment the next day, real money this time. He opened his bank account, blinked twice, and let out a long breath. Then he used half of it to upgrade his system. Again, he did not buy a better bed. He did not celebrate. He ordered bulk meal bars to keep from fainting during meetings. Mason was not chasing comfort. He was building fire. And every day he starved, it sharpened him, because the hunger reminded him who he was, and who they thought he could never become. The phone rang just after 2 a.m. Mason was awake anyway, squinting at code under the dim light of a desk lamp taped to a wall pipe. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Is this Mason Ridge? The voice was sharp, direct. I got your name from Branton Logistics. I am from Winford Group. Mason's eyes narrowed. Winford Group was not small. They handled coast-to-coast freight for half the state. Yes. Speaking. We want to talk. A pause. Tomorrow. In person. Mason sat up straighter. Where? Chicago. 10 a.m. I will send the address. Come ready. The line went dead. He sat motionless for a beat, then checked the number. It was real. He jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair, heart racing. For the first time in over a year, adrenaline surged through him not from survival, but from something bigger. A shift. A pivot point. By 6 a.m., he was on a train heading back into the city he had once crawled away from. The skyline grew closer, every building a memory, every intersection a scar. He arrived at the address, a glass tower in the heart of downtown. The lobby smelled of polished ambition and power. Inside, a man named Drew Wallace greeted him. Drew was clean-cut, maybe early 40s, exuding that brand of silent confidence that screamed connections. You built this alone? He asked, reviewing the pitch deck Mason had printed the night before. Yes. You are either a genius or a madman. Mason leaned forward. Sometimes both. Drew grinned. We are bleeding money. If your system works, we might just make you rich. The deal was not sealed yet, but it was in motion. As Mason stepped back onto the street, the wind hit his face like a slap, cold, real. For the first time, it felt like a war he could actually win. It rained for 3 days straight. Mason barely noticed. Back in the basement, he coded like a man possessed, refining the back end of the Winford system, patching bugs, prepping for scale. The system needed to work perfectly. No excuses. No errors. Not when everything was finally in motion. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of the storm. Sirens howled in the distance, thunder rolled like drums, and water pooled around Mason's front step. The ceiling dripped near his desk. He moved his chair twice to keep it from shorting his gear. He lived on caffeine, canned beans, and pure adrenaline. Sleep came in flashes. 10 minutes here, 15 there. During one of those hazy early mornings, he opened a new bank alert. The Winford deposit had arrived. 6 figures. Clean. Instant. Verified. Mason stared at the screen. No words. Just silence. Then he stood. Looked around. This basement, his war zone, was now a graveyard. He would leave it behind. He packed slowly that night, folding the few clothes he owned into a duffel. His hard drives. His old laptop, still taped at the hinges. A piece of paper with the very first line of code he ever wrote, stained and folded. By dawn, he was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just a single fingerprint on the basement light switch. The last trace of a ghost who once dreamed from the shadows. As the rain finally slowed and the city wiped the water from its windows, Mason Ridge re-entered the world. Not as a failure, but as a storm. The new office was small, just 2 rooms above a laundromat in West Loop. The floor creaked. The paint peeled. But the windows faced the city skyline, and to Mason, that was everything. He furnished it himself. Second-hand desks. A server rack built from scraps. Whiteboards filled with numbers and code. It did not matter. He had moved from the basement into daylight, and that felt like evolution. But with growth came a new kind of war. Investors who had ignored him now wanted in, but on their terms. Lowball offers. Control grabs. We will fund you, but we want 60%. One even laughed during the pitch and said, "You should be grateful for anything, Rich. You are still a nobody." Mason looked him in the eye and stood up. "I would rather sleep in the rain again than sell this to someone who sees me as nothing." He walked out of the meeting and back into the cold. Another no, but he smiled. Because every rejection now? It was not the end. It was a filter. He hired 2 interns, college kids who believed in the product and were hungry to learn. He paid them fair, fed them when he could, and taught them everything. The office became a bunker. The team grew tight. They pulled 18-hour days, ran A/B tests until their eyes bled, and laughed over dollar store noodles at midnight. They were not building just software. They were building a movement. And Mason never forgot what Daria said. You will never be successful. Every no he had ever heard turned into fuel. Every slammed door made the hallway louder when he walked through the right one. He was not chasing approval anymore. He was chasing destiny. The boardroom was too clean. Glass table, leather chairs, bottled water with gold labels. Mason sat opposite 2 men in navy suits with names nobody pronounced right unless they had 7 figures in their bank account. He wore a dark button-up, the only one he had without a missing cuff button. His pitch deck was open on the screen. The numbers were solid. The model, proven. His team, real. One of the executives leaned back. "You have built a real engine, Rich. We will offer full rollout support, plus media exposure. We want in at 12%. Mason nodded slowly. Inside, his chest burned. That was the best offer he had seen, and the one that terrified him most. Because this meant stepping out of survival and into power. He stood, clicked through to the final slide, the graph showing growth over 6 months. Then he said quietly, "Deal." The men smiled. Hands were shaken. Contracts printed. Pens clicked. When Mason walked out of that building, his hands trembled. But not from fear. From release. All the nights he had bled into code. All the times he had eaten air and rage. All the times he sat outside that restaurant where Daria laughed at him with Royce. They led to this. The first major contract signed. The first serious money in the bank. He walked into a small cafe down the street, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the corner near the window. No fanfare. No cameras. No applause. Just peace. The real kind. Earned. It took Mason 2 weeks to let himself breathe. He had worked in overdrive so long that stillness felt unnatural. But one evening, he found himself sitting in his new apartment, a high-rise loft, nothing excessive, just clean, quiet his. The view faced north, the river, the skyline, the streetlights dancing across windows like fireflies. He stood barefoot in the living room, holding a glass of water, staring out. This city had tried to break him, but it made him. A knock came at the door. It was Tasha, one of the interns, now promoted to project lead. She held up a tablet. "You were trending," she said, breathless. She showed him a news article. "Young tech CEO disrupts supply chain industry," his face. His company's logo. Daria would see this. Royce would see this. The city would see this. But Mason did not smile for them. He smiled for the broken boy he used to be, the one who slept on floors and starved for dignity. He raised his glass like a toast to no one and whispered, "Goodbye." The boy was gone. In his place stood a man built from ashes. And the world had no idea what was coming next. The new headquarters was a converted textile warehouse in River North. 3 floors, tall windows, exposed brick, and the kind of space that whispered ambition louder than any press release ever could. Mason walked through the empty building with blueprints under his arm. His footsteps echoed across the polished concrete. Sunlight spilled through the glass, painting gold across the floor like a promise. This was not a rental. He had bought it. With cash. The silence of ownership felt louder than any applause. He stood in the center of the main floor and pictured it all. Open workstations, the hum of servers, the clack of keyboards, the whiteboard wars, the caffeine-fueled brainstorms. A temple for builders. A battlefield for dreamers. Tasha joined him, eyes wide. "You really did it." Mason nodded slowly. "No, we are just getting started." Within weeks, the building came alive. Furniture arrived. Fiber lines installed. Murals painted by a local artist. One of them showed a broken ladder transformed into a launch pad. Mason stared at it every morning when he walked in. It reminded him why he bled for this. People walked differently around him now. Investors sat straighter. Journalists leaned in closer. Clients referred to him as Mr. Rich. But Mason remained calm, because deep down, he still remembered the cold tile of that basement floor. He carried that version of himself everywhere, as a scar, not a wound. And when Forbes called for an interview, he agreed, but not for fame, for the message. They asked, "What would you say to people who said you would never be successful?" Mason looked into the camera and smiled, not smug, steady. "I would say thank you." The hallway outside Mason's office was lined with small metal plates, each one etched with the name of someone who helped him rise. Not executives, not lawyers, not board members. His interns, his first clients. Stanley Pike. And at the very top, Mom, who raised a builder. Mason stared at the wall one late evening, alone in the dim light, running his fingers over each plate. These names were not just decoration. They were proof. Proof that he did not climb alone, even if the world thought he had. Then, the elevator dinged. Tasha stepped out with a strange look on her face. She held up a tablet. "There is something you need to see," she said. Mason took the tablet. A social media video was playing. Grainy. Phone recorded. Daria, in a restaurant, arguing with someone. Loud. Drunk. Furious. Her voice cracked as she yelled at the manager about her paycheck being late. The comments were brutal. "Is that the woman who left that rich guy? She looks rough now. Karma's brutal." Mason set the tablet down. He said nothing for a long time. Then softly, "She used to laugh like the world owed her a throne." Tasha waited, watching him carefully. Mason stood up, walked to the window, and stared down at the city. The same streets where he once starved were now below him, blinking with neon and steel. "I am not celebrating her fall," he said. "But I will not pretend I did not see this coming." Tasha nodded. "So what now?" Mason turned to her. Calm. Cold. "Now?" I walked past her. It was supposed to be a quiet dinner. Mason and 3 potential clients. Small talk. Wine. A reservation made by his assistant at a midtown fusion restaurant. Fancy, but not flashy. He wore black, tailored suit, clean fade, expression unreadable. The hostess led him to the private booth. And that is when it happened. He saw her, tray in hand, hair tied back, eyes tired. Daria. Waitressing. She froze. Mason did not blink. The air between them thickened like a storm cloud no one saw coming. One of the clients leaned toward Mason. "You know her?" He sipped his water. "I used to." Daria stepped closer, hesitating. Her lips parted. "Mason." He raised a hand gently, stopping her without touching. "Table service, please. Nothing personal." The words hit harder than a slap. She looked at the others, their expressions curious but quiet, then back at Mason. Her face crumpled for a split second, a flicker of something. Shame. Maybe regret. Then she turned and walked away, fast. Mason watched her go. No rage. No joy. Just silence. Later, after the clients left, he lingered by the bar, pretending to check his phone. Daria came over. "You really did it," she said, voice low. He did not look at her. "Yes. I made mistakes. You made choices." She stared at him, searching for anything familiar in his face. "Do you hate me?" He finally met her eyes. Calm. Level. "No," she nodded slowly. "I hate myself enough for both of us." Mason turned and walked out into the night, coat sharp against the wind, step steady, shoulders high. Behind him, the door swung shut, and the ghost of what they once were stayed inside. Daria stood in the back alley behind the restaurant, apron balled in one fist, cigarette in the other. The night air bit into her skin, but she barely noticed. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from something deeper. Humiliation had a taste. It was bitter, metallic, thick. Seeing Mason again had shattered something. Not because he was cold, not because he refused to speak, but because he looked through her like she was already forgotten. Inside, her manager shouted for someone to cover table 5. She flicked the cigarette, watched it spark on wet pavement, and dragged herself back in. Table 5 was gone. A different group sat there now. Still, she saw the ghost of Mason everywhere. She went home to a dark studio apartment 2 blocks from the bus station. Peeling wallpaper. One lamp. An old mattress on the floor. Royce had left her a year ago, walked out with a duffel and 2 words. "It's over." No goodbye. No explanation. Just a silent retreat. Since then, it had been job after job, paycheck after paycheck, hoping to climb out of a hole she had dug with designer heels and fake promises. Now Mason stood at the top of the world, and she could not even afford new shoes. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the phone. His number was still saved. Her thumb hovered. But no, there was nothing left to say, and even if there was, he did not need to hear it. Because Daria finally understood something brutal. When you laugh at someone's climb, you should pray they never learn how to fly. The office buzzed with quiet chaos. Mason walked past rows of focused employees, coders, analysts, marketers, all pieces of a machine he had built from dust and bruises. The glass walls reflected him now, clean-cut, composed, unrecognizable from the man who once coded in a leaking basement. Inside the conference room, Tasha waited. She slid a folder across the table. "This just came through," she said. "It is an acquisition opportunity." Mason opened the folder. His eyes scanned the documents. The restaurant chain, the one where Daria worked. They were financially bleeding, mismanaged. One location had already shut down due to unpaid rent. The chain was up for partial acquisition cheap. Tasha raised an eyebrow. "You want to pass?" Mason closed the folder slowly. "No, I want to own it." Tasha hesitated. "Because of her?" "No, because it will make money once it is cleaned up. And yes, it will send a message." The deal closed in 4 days. Just like that, Mason Ridge became the silent owner of the very place where the woman who once called him worthless now served water to strangers. He made no announcement, no public posts, no press release. He let the truth live in silence, where it screamed the loudest. And when he walked into that same restaurant a week later and saw Daria again, he did not say a word. But she knew. The way her hand trembled. The way she could not look at him. The way the new general manager greeted him with, "Good evening, Mr. Ridge." Sometimes revenge is not a scream. It is a whisper you cannot unhear. They called him ruthless now. Behind closed doors, investors whispered that Mason Ridge made quiet moves with violent impact. A strategist who smiled in meetings and flipped entire markets the next day. But Mason never yelled, never threatened. He just moved, and every move left ripples. In 1 month, he bought out 3 struggling distributors, all former clients of Royce's automotive empire. Royce, now stripped of influence, tried to pivot into new industries. Mason blocked him at every turn. Legally, strategically, flawlessly. He used old connections. He bought up suppliers. He denied credit access through partnerships. Royce tried to fight back with lawsuits, interviews, anything. But the world no longer listened. Because while Royce chased cameras, Mason built empires. One meeting, Mason sat in a silent elevator, heading to the top floor of a financial firm he was negotiating with. Tasha stood beside him, reviewing data on her tablet. "You really are turning into a ghost story," she said without looking up. Mason chuckled softly. "How so?" "Everyone feels you. No one sees you coming." The elevator doors opened. Mason stepped out, gaze sharp, suit clean, voice calm. He walked into the boardroom, shook hands, and made another deal. Behind him, his reputation walked 10 steps ahead. They feared him, yes, but they respected him more. And Mason had learned something important. The best kind of revenge? It is not destruction. It is domination. Silent, strategic, and permanent. Mason sat in his office late one Friday night, the city's glow reflecting off the dark glass. His jacket hung over the chair, sleeves rolled up. In front of him, on the desk, was a photograph. It was old. Him and Daria. Taken at the beach during simpler times, her arms wrapped around him, both smiling like the world was theirs. He stared at it for a long time. Then he calmly fed it through the shredder. Some wars end with explosions. Others end with paperwork. Mason had spent years crafting his revenge, but he realized now, it was never about screaming in her face. It was about building a life so vast, so undeniable, that she could never escape the shadow of it. Still, he needed closure. One final act. Not cruelty, just clarity. He picked up his phone and called the restaurant's regional manager, a man he now controlled quietly through the acquisition. "Promote Daria," he said simply. The manager paused. "Are you sure?" "Her record. Promote her to assistant shift supervisor." Mason interrupted. "Give her just enough power to taste it. Then review her monthly performance like everyone else. And if she fails, she will." Mason ended the call without another word. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a single breath of satisfaction. Not because she would fall, but because he would never fall again. That was the true rule of his revenge. You do not become the monster. You become the monument they have to walk past every single day. 2 weeks later, Mason sat at a rooftop lounge downtown, nursing a whiskey as the sun died behind the skyscrapers. He was supposed to meet a venture capitalist, someone new, someone big. But when the chair across from him pulled back, it was not a stranger. It was Daria. Mason froze. She wore a simple black dress, hair loose, makeup light, a far cry from the glamorous facade she used to wear like armor. "What are you doing here?" he asked coldly. She smiled, a slow, tired smile. "I reached out through a mutual contact. I knew you would never answer if you saw my name." Mason did not speak. She continued, voice soft. "I just wanted to talk." He leaned back, folding his arms. "Talk about what?" "About us. About what happened." "There is no us," Mason said. Daria's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. Desperation. Maybe something darker. "I made mistakes," she said, voice cracking. "But you were obsessed, Mason. You were always chasing something bigger. You never saw me." The words hit harder than he expected. Because somewhere, buried deep, there was a sliver of truth. He had chased dreams. He had ignored warning signs. But he had never deserved betrayal. "You chose Royce," Mason said, voice low. "You chose everything you thought was shiny." Tears welled in her eyes. "He used me. He lied to me. I thought I was trading up, but I was throwing everything away." Mason stood. "You did not just throw me away. You threw away yourself." He tossed a few bills on the table and walked out. Behind him, Daria's sobs tangled with the wind. And the knife twisted deeper, not by his hand, but by her own. Mason tried to leave the rooftop with a clear mind, but as he crossed the street, his phone buzzed. It was Tasha. "Urgent." He answered. "Boss," she said quickly, "you need to see this. Daria filed a complaint against you." "What?" Mason stopped mid-step. "She is claiming workplace harassment. Emotional distress. She is using the promotion you ordered as proof you were targeting her." Mason's chest tightened, not with fear, but with a chilling focus. She has no case, he said firmly. No, but she is not trying to win in court, Tasha replied. She is trying to wreck your reputation. Mason stood still on the sidewalk, the city lights blurring around him. He could almost admire it. Daria's final move, poison disguised as honey, crying victim to cover her own collapse. He turned toward the looming skyline, his name already attached to millions in contracts, hundreds of employees, thousands of future dreams. She thought she could still hurt him. She thought she could pull him back into the mud. But Mason Ridge had built his empire on surviving storms. And no storm scared him anymore. He walked forward, dialing his lawyer. It was time to finish this. Permanently. Mason arrived at the restaurant dressed in quiet war, charcoal gray suit, black shirt, no tie. His presence was sharp, clean, commanding. This was not the same man who once sat in the shadows. This was the man who owned the building. He had agreed to meet Daria and her attorney, not out of fear, but to see how deep her desperation truly ran. The room was private, lit by low golden light and silence, so still you could hear ambition breathing. Daria sat across the table with a lawyer named Ron Darris, a man known for weaponizing gossip before evidence. He looked slick, fake smiled, too confident. Mason took his seat calmly. Ron leaned forward. Mr. Ridge, let us keep this simple. My client is willing to retract her complaint in exchange for a severance and signed apology. Mason blinked slowly. You are not here for justice, he said. You are here for leverage. Ron did not flinch. We are here for resolution. Mason turned to Daria. Is this really the game you want to play? Her lips were tight. Her eyes danced with a fire that was not passion. It was fear masked as pride. You ruined my life, she said. This is balance. No, Mason replied, his voice quiet but sharp. This is karma catching up. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were digital logs, timestamps, security footage from the restaurant, access records, body cam audio from HR meetings. Proof. Daria's face drained of color. Ron reached for the folder, but Mason pulled it back. You file that lawsuit, I will countersue for defamation and attempted corporate sabotage. You will lose. And you will owe me more than you can ever pay back. Silence. Cold. Heavy. Then Mason stood. This was not dinner, he said. This was your last bluff. You played it wrong. He left them there, two devils at a table built for a king. The next morning, the footage was sent quietly, precisely, to the company's legal team, the board of directors, and a few key press contacts Mason trusted. He did not make a scene. He did not tweet. He did not gloat. The system worked for him now. Within hours, Daria's complaint was exposed as fiction. Her manipulation laid bare through voice recordings, timing logs, and employee testimonies. She had whispered lies in the dark, but Mason had built walls that could hear. Tasha entered his office around noon, holding a printed statement from legal. She has officially withdrawn her complaint, she said. No payout. No apology. Just silence. Mason did not smile. He nodded once, then returned to reviewing an expansion blueprint on his tablet. Tasha hesitated. You are not even slightly satisfied? He looked up. His voice was flat. She destroyed me once. This time, she destroyed herself. He turned back to his work. Revenge had already happened. This was just cleanup. Later that evening, a journalist published a piece titled, The Lie That Tried to Kill a Billion-Dollar Dream. It did not name Daria directly, but everyone in the industry knew. She became a whisper in boardrooms, a warning in contract clauses, a silent ghost employers avoided. Mason never said her name again, because the best revenge is when the world does it for you. Royce Mayfield was not doing well. His once booming auto empire had shrunk into a scrap heap of lawsuits, late payments, and cold calls. 3 of his showrooms had been seized. One of his biggest suppliers, quietly acquired by Rich Tech, had cut ties last month. Now, Royce sat in a glass office that no longer had glass walls, just cracked drywall, a broken AC unit, and silence. He stared at the termination letter in his hands. Another investor pulled out. No more capital. No more time. Outside his window, construction workers passed by wearing jackets with the Ridge Tech logo. Mason's company expanding a logistics hub just 2 blocks down. It was not coincidence. It was placement. It was checkmate. Meanwhile, In a quiet conference room uptown, Mason signed off on one final deal, a full buyout of Royce's last remaining stake in a transport company. He paid cash, and then he shut it down. Not for profit, for principle. Tasha leaned toward him, smiling faintly. You just ended his empire. Mason said nothing. He looked out the window, thinking of all the times Royce laughed in his face, and how those echoes had finally gone silent. Then he turned to her and said, let us get back to work. Because kings do not celebrate over pawns. They move on. Daria stood in the break room, staring into the vending machine like it held answers instead of off-brand snacks. Nobody looked at her the same anymore. Since the failed complaint, she was a ghost even while standing still. Staff avoided her. Managers gave her the silent nod. New hires whispered when she passed by. Her promotion had been quietly revoked. She worked weekends now. Doubles. No apology. No explanation. Just nothing. The city that once bowed to her heels now stepped over her. She pulled a folded check stub from her apron. Minimum wage, reduced hours, deductions. She crumpled it and sat alone at the small metal table, face buried in her hands. The tears tried to come, but there was nothing left. Mason had not shouted. He had not retaliated. He had simply erased her. And that kind of silence was worse than rage, because it meant he did not even see her as a threat anymore. He had moved on, and she was just standing still in the wreckage of her own lies. Royce stood at the edge of his former showroom, now stripped bare for auction. Buyers moved through like vultures, poking, inspecting, bidding low. Laughter echoed off the empty walls. Royce watched from a distance, wearing sunglasses to hide the bloodshot eyes. He had not slept much. Not since the bank started calling. Not since Mason's name kept appearing behind every closed door he knocked on. His last Corvette, the one he used to flaunt on social media, went for half its value. Everything he built was being sold by strangers in plastic badges. And Mason? He was not even there. He did not need to be. Royce paced outside, while someone bought his leather office chair for $25. The one he used to sit in like a king. By sunset, the building was empty. Royce looked at the for lease sign bolted to the front. And it hit him. He had not just lost money. He had lost legacy. And the man who did it never even raised his voice. Mason stood on the rooftop of Ridge Tech HQ, hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. Chicago pulsed below, alive, glowing, restless. Behind him, the company was thriving. His team had grown from 3 interns to over 90 employees. Clients trusted him. Partners respected him. And the press? They stopped calling him the comeback story. Now they called him the one who rewrote the game. But tonight, none of that mattered. He held a photo in his hand, a new one. His office team surprised him with it. A candid shot of Mason walking the floor, sleeves rolled, whiteboard in the background, a dozen people behind him mid-discussion. He looked like a leader, because now he was. Not the boy who got laughed out of rooms. Not the man who needed revenge to breathe. But someone new. Someone whole. Tasha joined him, sipping coffee. Feels quiet up here, she said. It is supposed to, Mason replied. He tucked the photo into his coat and turned back to the view. There was no throne. There never needed to be. Just a man who had built something real. And the peace of knowing he no longer had to prove it. Mason's assistant buzzed him just before noon. There is someone here to see you, she said. Says it is personal. He almost dismissed it, until she said the name. Daria. She stood in the lobby wearing a plain coat, hair tied back, eyes lowered. No makeup, no perfume, just raw silence. Mason stepped out of the elevator, but said nothing. She looked up. I am not here to beg, she said. I just needed to see for myself. He waited. Daria nodded slowly. You really made it. I told you I would. I know. I just never believed it until now. A beat of silence passed. Then she stepped back. Goodbye, Mason. She turned and left without another word. No drama. No apology. Just closure. And this time, he did not chase it. He watched her walk out of the building he built. A building she said would never exist. And he whispered to himself, I forgive you. But the past? It stayed behind the glass, where it belonged. Mason sat at the edge of the river walk, the wind biting cold against his face. People passed him by, tourists laughing, joggers breathing hard, cyclists flashing past in blurs. Life moved forward, indifferent to anyone's pain or pride. He took a deep breath, feeling the city's pulse in his chest. It was strange. After years of chasing victory, standing at the top felt still. Forgiving Daria had not been about her. It had been about releasing himself. She no longer lived inside his victories. She no longer haunted the spaces between his achievements. She was a chapter, not the whole book. His phone buzzed. Tasha's name lit the screen. "Update," she said quickly. "Our latest AI integration was approved. You are officially a government contractor now." Mason let the news sink in. Government contracts meant security, influence, longevity. It meant Ridge Tech was no longer just a company. It was an institution. "Good work," he said. Tasha hesitated. "You earned this." Mason smiled softly. "We earned this." He ended the call and looked out at the river. Forgiveness was not weakness. It was freedom. And Mason Ridge was finally free. Across the city, Daria sat on a bus headed nowhere. The engine rattled. The windows fogged. The city lights smeared across the glass like broken dreams. She clutched a folded eviction notice in her hand. It was not just the job loss. It was the debts, the burned bridges, the friends who had disappeared the moment the money dried up. Every choice she made had built this cage. And now, there was no key. At a red light, she caught her reflection, tired, hollow, older than her years. Once, she had laughed at Mason's dreams, mocked his ambition, walked away when he needed someone to believe. Now, she would have given anything to go back, to stand beside him, to have even a fraction of the life he built. But regret does not pay rent, and the past does not negotiate. The bus lurched forward. Daria pressed her forehead to the cold window and closed her eyes. This was not karma punishing her. This was her punishing herself. And the worst part? She deserved it. Mason's team gathered in the glass conference room, the city lights glowing behind them like a stage set for kings and queens. They were discussing expansion, international deals, tech summits, mergers. But Mason's mind drifted for a moment. He thought about every no that built him. Every night he went hungry. Every laugh that pushed him harder. And he realized he had one last war to win. Not against Daria. Not against Royce. Not even against the doubters. The war was against silence. Against kids sleeping in cars the way he once did. Against young dreamers being told they were nothing. He stood up. Everyone looked at him. "We are starting a foundation," Mason said simply. Tasha leaned forward. "For what?" "For them," Mason said. "Scholarships. Incubators. Grants. No kid with a dream should ever have to beg for belief." The room shifted from strategy to purpose. And Mason knew legacy was not just about building towers. It was about lifting others onto them. Weeks later, Royce faced the court. Fraud, tax evasion, contract violations. The evidence was overwhelming, most of it compiled by firms that Mason had quietly partnered with during Royce's downfall. The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale ambition. Royce sat at the defense table, sweating through his cheap suit, eyes darting, legs bouncing. A man who once held cities in the palm of his hand, now reduced to a cautionary tale. The judge's voice cut through the air like a blade. Guilty on all counts. Mason watched from the last row of the gallery, silent, still. He was not there to gloat. He was there to witness. Royce turned briefly, scanning the room, desperate for familiar faces. He found Mason. Their eyes met. And in that second, Royce understood. This was never about revenge. It was about survival. About proving that the real kings are the ones who do not need to crush others to rise. Mason nodded once, not in hatred, not in triumph. Just finality. And then he turned and walked out of the courtroom into a future built with his own hands. Mason stood in the center of the newly rented warehouse, sunlight filtering through the dusty skylights. It smelled of wood, old oil, and potential. This was where the foundation would begin. He had bought the space quietly, away from Ridge Tech's main operations. Here, no titles mattered. No brands. Just work. The plan was simple. Turn the warehouse into an innovation hub for young developers, inventors, and entrepreneurs who had no family money, no insider connections, no backup plans. Just fire in their veins and ideas in their heads. Tasha joined him with a clipboard, glancing around the open floor. "We can fit 40 workstations here," she said. "Maybe a mentorship program." Mason nodded. "And scholarships," he added. "No hidden fees. No fake promises. Real support." She smiled. "You are not just building a company anymore." Mason turned to her, his face calm but burning underneath. "Hate got me here," he said. "But it cannot be what keeps me here." Outside, the city roared and moved loud, restless. But inside this building, it was silent, full of possibilities. And Mason knew, building something out of love was the only real revenge. The first class of Ridge Foundation scholars arrived 6 months later. 20 young faces, wide-eyed, nervous, full of dreams they barely dared to say out loud. Mason sat with them in a simple meeting room. No stage, no big speeches, no expensive suits. Just him, a chair, and a promise. He leaned forward, voice low, steady. "No one here will ever have to apologize for dreaming bigger than their paycheck." The room shifted, kids straightening their backs, lifting their chins, daring to believe they could belong. On the wall behind Mason, a mural stretched across brick, a ladder made of broken pieces, shattered wood, twisted metal, scraps. But it reached higher than any perfect one ever could. Each scholarship was named after someone important from Mason's journey. Stanley Pike, Tasha Miles, and even one, quietly, discreetly, named for Mason's mother, who had passed during his climb but never once told him to stop chasing dreams. The names would live longer than buildings, longer than Mason himself, because true success, it is when people say your name, and it means hope, not history. Late one evening, Mason walked the Ridge Tech campus alone. It had grown fast, 2 office towers for satellite warehouses and a downtown innovation center. Employees laughed in break rooms. Coders huddled over projects. Ideas flew across whiteboards like sparks. He was no longer a ghost trying to claw his way into the city. He was the gravity pulling others upward. As he crossed the plaza, a new recruit, barely 22, jogged up, breathless. "Sir," he said, nervous. "Thank you for the opportunity. I was sleeping in my car last month. This job changed everything." Mason clapped him on the shoulder. "Earn it," he said simply. "And when you can, build something for the next kid behind you." The recruit nodded fiercely, disappearing back into the crowd. Mason looked up at the skyline, his buildings gleaming like sentinels. No more chasing shadows. No more fighting ghosts. Just building giants. Months turned into a year. The foundation expanded into 5 cities. Ridge Tech entered international markets. Mason's story, once whispered in alleyways and laughed at in bars, became a case study in universities. Documentaries, articles, awards. They all tried to capture the journey. But Mason knew. The real story was not about billion-dollar valuations. It was not even about crushing enemies. It was about proving one simple, stubborn truth. You can rise without becoming the people who tried to destroy you. He stood at the back of a charity gala one night, tuxedo crisp, drink untouched. On stage, a young woman he had sponsored accepted a grant for her AI startup, trembling hands, tearful voice, a future unwritten. Mason slipped out before the applause started. He did not need the credit. He did not need the spotlight. He needed only one thing, to know that somewhere out there, another kid with nothing but a dream would have a fighting chance. And that, he thought, was a louder victory than revenge could ever scream. The sun barely crested over the skyline when Mason stepped into his regular corner cafe, a habit he had kept since his first contract years ago. The bell over the door chimed, the smell of roasted coffee beans wrapping around him like a memory. On the rack near the register, a newspaper screamed in bold letters, "Royce Mayfield sentenced 5 years for fraud and embezzlement." A photo accompanied it. Royce, handcuffed, head bowed. Mason picked up the paper, scanning the story without emotion. Every charge, every dirty deal, every lie, laid out for the world to dissect. The barista handed him a black coffee without asking. Regular order. No need for words. Mason paid, tucked the paper under his arm, and stepped outside. He stood there for a long moment, coffee in one hand, the cold nipping at his fingers. Then he dropped the newspaper into the trash. He did not need the world to confirm what he already knew. He had moved beyond needing validation. Royce's downfall was not his crown. It was just another dead page in a life moving forward. And Mason Ridge? He was still writing his story in ink no one could erase. The diner buzzed with tired waitresses, clattering dishes, and the low murmur of worn-out customers. In the back corner, tucked behind the soda fountain, Daria wiped down tables with slow, mechanical movements. Her uniform hung loose on her frame. Her sneakers were frayed. Her hands cracked from dishwater and cold. She barely noticed when a couple left without tipping. She barely noticed anything anymore. The eviction had forced her into a motel on the outskirts of the city, one with flickering lights and locks that did not click properly. She paid by the week, scraping together enough to stay afloat. Dreams were a distant language now. Once, she had measured success in jewelry and cars. Now, it was clean sheets and quiet nights without police sirens outside the window. A customer brushed past her roughly without apology. She kept her head down. Outside the window, she caught a glimpse of something, a black SUV, polished, sharp, a rich tech sticker barely visible on the corner window. Mason's company vehicles. She flinched, not because she thought it was him, but because she knew it would never be him. He had no reason to look back, and she had no ladder left to climb, only an endless, gray spiral downward. Mason leaned against the railing of a pedestrian bridge overlooking the river, the night wind tugging at his jacket. Below, the city moved on, bright, chaotic, alive. Behind him, Ridge Tech prepared for a global launch. His foundation continued to grow, funding scholarships in 6 states. His name was attached to movements bigger than his own pain. But Mason was not thinking about success tonight. He was thinking about endings. He had built his life brick by brutal brick. He had watched those who betrayed him fall by their own hands. He had forgiven, not for them, but for himself. And now, he realized something deeper. He was not angry anymore. He was not broken anymore. The scars were still there, yes, but they no longer hurt. They had become part of the architecture. Strong, weathered, real. He stood there for a while, breathing in the sharp air, watching the reflections dance on the water. No tears, no regret, just peace. And as the first flakes of winter dusted the bridge, Mason Ridge smiled quietly to himself. Not the smile of a man who won a war. The smile of a man who no longer needed to fight one. The gala hall shimmered under 1,000 lights. Laughter floated across the room like champagne bubbles. Deals were signed here. Futures were shaped here. Tonight, Mason Ridge was the guest of honor, not for revenge, not for victory, but for the change he had sparked. He moved through the crowd with ease, now confident, steady. And yet, at the far edge of the room, he caught a glimpse of her. Daria, standing alone, not as a guest, not as a player, but serving canapés on a silver tray, invisible to the people she once sought to impress. For a moment, Mason's chest tightened, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something gentler. Pity, perhaps. Understanding. Life had already dealt her every lesson she had refused to learn. He did not approach. He did not gloat. He simply lifted his glass slightly in her direction, not as an insult, but as a silent goodbye. Daria saw him. For a second, her mask cracked, the ghost of the girl who once dreamed beside him flickering behind tired eyes. Mason turned away, because true kings do not need to destroy the fallen. They walk past them and keep building higher. Later that night, Mason walked the river walk alone, the city lights a soft blur behind him. He had it all now: success, peace, respect. But more importantly, he had himself. Whole, unafraid, free. His phone buzzed. A message from Tasha. Final contract closed. Ridge Foundation will launch in 10 new cities next year. Proud of you, boss. Mason smiled, slipping the phone into his pocket. He looked at the river, at the endless current moving forward. Once, he had been drowning in it. Now he moved with it. He pulled out a worn piece of paper from his jacket, the first line of code he ever wrote, stained and faded. He smiled and tossed it into the water, watching it float away into the dark. He no longer needed it to prove anything. Everything he was already written into the world around him. Mason Ridge was not the boy who needed to be seen anymore. He was the man who had built something that could never be erased. Morning broke over the skyline in soft golds and fierce reds. Mason stood at the balcony of his penthouse, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch awake beneath him. He thought about every moment that led here, every betrayal, every fall, every heartbreak, and he realized the real victory was never about revenge. It was about endurance, about refusing to let anyone else define your story. The lesson? Pain shapes you. Failure teaches you. Betrayal sharpens you. But only you decide who you become after it all. Choose wisely. He smiled to himself, feeling the weight of the past lift like morning mist. The world below bustled, a million dreams waking up, a million battles just beginning. And Mason Ridge was ready for all of it. He turned back inside, already planning his next project, his next move. Because life did not stop at victory. It only grew bigger. End scene. Final message to audience: thank you for staying with Mason Ridge's journey till the very end. What an incredible ride it has been, full of dreams, betrayal, revenge, and finally, redemption. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I would love to know. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us bring you more epic, unforgettable stories like this. Stay tuned. We will meet very soon in another thrilling, emotional, and powerful revenge saga. Until then, take care of yourself and keep believing in your story. See you in the next one.